Welcome to Nick. Nick is a fellow alum of Cornell University. Very excited about that. He also spent a good deal of time at Constellation Brands and has recently joined Hydrosome Labs, which is a super exciting technology that Maya was kind enough to introduce us to. She's very encouraged by this technology, so we're super excited to have Nick join us. And Nick, you got a lot of slides, so with Ryan's help, hopefully we can get through in 35 minutes or so. But we're thrilled you're here, and we look forward to working with you guys on a variety of projects. So without further ado, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, JD. Much appreciated. Yeah, thanks everybody for your time and attention today. So yeah, again, as JD mentioned, I'm Nick Jackowetz. I'm the SVP of Hydrosome Labs, focusing on scientific and technical ends. And so we're here today to talk about this really interesting new area of science called ultrafine bubbles, also called nanobubble technology. And this area has so many really interesting facets and can be used in so many different ways. But today we're going to talk more about fermentation and how we can use these little tiny bubbles in unexpected ways. So traditionally, when we think about fermentation, there's some issues that we commonly encounter, which is around different issues around gas transfer or inefficient capacity of tanks. If we just look at the estimated amount of tank space needed by 2030 to meet different protein demands made via fermentation, we're at 10 billion liters. Today, we have about 10 million liters or so that's available and up for grabs. So as this continues to grow, we're really underwater in terms of how much tank space is available. So this opens a door to efficiencies and ways of making things more effectively. So we look at it today too, the precision fermentation space still has a lot of headwinds against it, mainly on cost. So the fact that a lot of our raw materials or the ways that how much energy go into it and labor are adding up lots of costs, which make the end products of this precision fermentation rather inefficient and not on cost parity with other materials that are made in different ways. So that needs to change if this whole space is really going to take off. And that's where on our side, we start looking at this and thinking about the current innovation focus. A lot of fermentation companies are looking heavily at what we call upstream and downstream processes. So ways of engineering cells to make their products more effectively or tweaking them to grow in different environments with, say, less nutrients, or on the downstream side where they look at extracting whatever comes out of that fermentation. But they're still overlooking some key issues, mainly around again, gas transfer, just overall lack of capacity for fermentations and just general low titers and low yields. And so that's where Hydrosome is looking at this from a different angle. So we're looking at it more from the growth phase, thinking more about that phase of fermentation that isn't commonly addressed that much. There hasn't been a lot of advancements in sort of bioreactor technology itself. There's been different ways to infuse gases and agitators and bubble columns and things like this, but we haven't really seen an uptick in ways of really moving the needle in a significant way. And that's where Hydrosome comes in. So we're able to really use these ultrafine or nano bubbles in a way to unlock these enhancements in the growth phase, really helping with that gas transfer capacity and increasing yields and titers. And we do this on existing systems. So we're able to adopt our ultrafine bubble technology to your current tanks. So you don't need to buy new tanks or do anything special that way. We use what you already have. It's very scalable. It's low carbon footprint and really addressing a lot of the issues today. So that's at a high level some of the questions and problems we're addressing. To get into ultrafine bubbles, though, a bit more, we're talking about a piece of technology that Hydrosome Labs has created that can take different liquid streams. This could be media, this could be water, various liquids, and infuse them with very precise levels of ultrafine bubbles. And we'll talk more about that in the presentation. But what this does is we see an enhancement in mass transfer, so movement of gases and solutes to cells more effectively, which is really important. And it's a really novel way to do this. At Hydrosome, we're looking at different sectors that we really focus on, primarily industrial, so the fermentation side, and consumer products. So there's, as I mentioned, there's so many ways to use ultrafine bubbles. We're focusing on some new and novel sectors, whereas traditionally, if you look up literature on ultrafine bubbles, you see them used a lot in agriculture, so to grow plants more effectively, and also wastewater treatment and aquaculture, so helping fish grow too. So those are classic areas, but we're really pushing into new spaces and looking at how we can unlock the potential of ultrafine bubbles again in these new areas. So let's dive in a little bit more into the equipment and kind of how this all comes together. So here's an example of our technology, which is shown there on the left. This is at the University of Illinois, their IBRL lab, where we're running some fermentations today, actually. And how this all works is we have our technology. It hooks up right next to a tank that's running a fermentation, and we're doing a pump over, essentially. We're taking the liquid from the tank, and we're pulling it through our tech to infuse ultrafine bubbles. And you can see there my jazzy little attempt at an animation, but that's what's happening is we're pulling all that liquid out, we're infusing bubbles, and we're putting that liquid back into the tank. This doesn't harm cells, and it's very effective way to add a large amount of ultrafine bubbles into a fermenter, again, for the purposes of mass transfer, trying to enhance the movement of gas and solutes into these cells to really boost these fermentations with the current infrastructure that's already in place. And so a lot of questions we get around this is around, can we clean this? Is it easy to clean? Because sterilizability is really important. And yes, it's very easy to clean. You can add chemicals to it. You can add steam to it. That's not a problem. It's very energy efficient and scalable. So there's a lot of ways to move this and make the volumes larger. That's not an issue. Foaming is a question we get too. If we're pumping over and doing a lot of pumping action, that can cause foaming. We've actually seen reduced foaming with this equipment and these ultrafine bubbles, which is really interesting. And it's not harmful to cells. That's a question we get too. If you're pumping our cells through this, is that going to be an issue? And we haven't seen that. The bubbles themselves, let's put that in perspective too. The macro bubbles and coarse bubbles that we see in our day-to-day lives, maybe in our can of soda or sparkling wine, those are these micro and macro bubbles. You can see them. Ultrafine bubbles were only defined in 2017 by ISO, and they're bubbles that are less than 1 micron or 1,000 nanometers. So quite small. Our ultrafine bubbles, though, are more around 100 nanometers. And to put that in perspective, that's about the size of a virus particle. So very, very, very tiny scales. And I think we all know when we get to these nanoscales, the physics and the things at that level get a little interesting and can be beneficial too if we can harness them in the right way. So our ultrafine bubbles are very, very small. And the example we always get is that champagne bubble that you see in your champagne flute. We can fit 1 trillion of our ultrafine bubbles in that little champagne bubble. So the scales are just quite interesting. This technology has been around since about the 80s or so, when it was really discovered, and this happened in Japan. And since then, you see a lot more peer-reviewed literature looking at harnessing these bubbles in different ways. And so especially in the last 10, 15 years, our ability to be able to measure these bubbles has really increased. And that's helped the scientific community be able to use them and to adapt them in different ways. So it's really exciting. Some of the this is probably the most scientific slide here, and then we'll get back to some other things. But one of the things we have to remember is with these bubbles, they're different. Again, the physics when we get really small are different. And so these bubbles, if you can imagine them being very tiny, but they're so tiny now that they don't float. So it's really hard to imagine a bubble that doesn't float, but these ones don't because they are so tiny. So they're not governed by buoyancy, they're just governed by Brownian motion, which means random movement. So that's really important. That means that if we infuse a bubble into liquid, it stays there. It doesn't want to rise to the surface and leave. They also have tremendous amounts of surface area. And this is really important because if we're talking about mass transfer and moving gases and solutes, we need lots of these bubbles to act as little carriers to move that mass around. And this is where the bubbles come in. And then lastly, too, inside of the bubbles, they actually have quite high pressure, which is dictated by something called the Laplace equation. So as we shrink a bubble down, the pressure inside of it goes up quite tremendously and exponentially. And so bubbles that we're talking about here, around 100 nanometers, have about 30 atmospheres, or about 30 times the pressure we feel today, which makes them really effective carriers of gas, and they really pack a punch in terms of their ability to move gas around. So it's really interesting properties. But then the question we get a lot too is, how does this all come together? And that's a topic that we're really interested in finding the solution for in the scientific community as well. One of the ways to sort of think about this is a concept we call attract, deliver, and enhance. So the bubbles themselves are moving through solution. They have electrostatic charge. They have hydrophobic regions. They can attract different solutes that are in solution, and they can bring them in close proximity to cells. They can also bring that gas payload as well to them. So getting these cells the things they need more effectively through these enhanced kinetics, enhanced movements of these bubbles. We've done some work looking at how cells respond when these bubbles are in solution, and we've noticed that there's changes in actually gene regulation, and this was done in E. coli, in response to having these bubbles. So we're noticing really positive movements in terms of how these genes are firing or changing in terms of transport. So we're seeing a lot more activity and movement of things across the membrane, which is beneficial if we're trying to get, say, nutrients to the cells. We're seeing a lot more biosynthesis pathways, so the cells are growing and thriving under these ultrafine bubble conditions. And then gas availability. So oxygen is typically a limiting reagent when it comes to fermentations. The cells can't get enough in aerobic fermentation. We're seeing upregulation in pathways that revolve around oxygen, which means that these cells are probably getting more oxygen, and we're doing more work on that right now. But that's really important because that's a limiting factor. And if we can improve oxygen uptake rates, that's really big for the whole space. So those are the areas we're focused on today. So here's a nifty little video showing how we measure these ultrafine bubbles, and it's through something called nanoparticle tracking analysis. And so it's a combination of laser scattering and microscopy. And so, Ryan, if you want to click the next button, we can see a little video pop up here. So we can first pump different liquids into this machine. And you'll see here deionized water rinse. So here we won't see much because deionized water doesn't have much in it. And those little red dots are little particles that we see in solution. So it's good deionized water doesn't have much in it. Now, if we take a liquid that has ultrafine bubbles in it and add this to our piece of equipment to look for particles, it's a much different story. So we can see a lot of these little guys floating around in there. We can measure the size and the concentration of them to determine how much we've made and understand more about the composition of those bubbles. This gives us an analytical tool that's very rapid to be able to analyze those samples and understand what we're making in there. So that's critical, and this is sort of the go-to standard right now in the space, and we have this in our lab in Chicago. So it's a really interesting technology, as we talked about. There's different ways we can harness this technology for fermentation. So there's kind of a simple way, and then there's our way we do it commercially. So the simple way to do a proof of concept is by simply infusing water with ultrafine bubbles. And we can do this with our technology. We can make lots of bubbles and put them into that water. Again, the bubbles aren't buoyant, so that all those bubbles stay in there. We ship it off to a client who's doing, say, a fermentation, and they can do some work and see if it moves the needle for them in their fermentation space and what they're doing. And then from there, if we get a good positive result, which we typically do, we move on to our commercial application, which is what you saw in the earlier slide, where we actually have a reactor, our equipment that's hooked up to do this recirculation. So again, move that liquid, that broth in those cells through our technology and make ultrafine bubbles and put them back into solution continuously. And this has the benefit of being able to add those bubbles continuously, and then it's an additive effect. So the more we pump, the more bubbles we add, and then the more benefit we bring to this fermentation. So that's typically how we engage. And by simply shipping water, which was the first example there, we see benefits immediately. We see differences in the growth curves of, say, Saccharomyces, common yeast that a lot of people use, or even Pichia pastoris, which is commonly used to also produce proteins. And we see benefits there in terms of, again, that decreased lag phase, increased exponential phase of growth, and then overall increases in biomass. So this is, good early signs for us showing that these bubbles were definitely doing something and that there was something to these bubbles in fermentation. And then from here, we've looked at other types of cells as well. So filamentous fungi is another important cell line that's used commonly as it pertains to protein production. So making these cells for biomass, for alternative meats and alternative proteins. And so simply, again, by sending the water over to this collaborator, they were able to increase their biomass just by having a little bit of bubbles in there by 8%, which was significant versus their control. And so again, we're working with them to have a continuous continuous infusion process right now to really boost these numbers even further. But you can see these early results do show quite some promise. And then another example here too is with another collaborator in Illinois, where they were looking at, again, the production of, in this case, it was a glycochemical. So this is a sugar alcohol actually here. And you see differences again where the E. coli are growing faster, they're growing to a higher biomass level, and we're getting a higher, tighter production of this sugar alcohol, which is what they desire at the end of the day. So that was really promising. And right now we're running this fermentation at pilot scale at the University of Illinois. And so again, it all comes together by using this technology. Additive tank technology is what we call it, being able to bolt this onto a tank, use your current infrastructure, what you have, and be a very simple and automated process. So really trying to boost what you have without adding more chemicals or having a high electrical bill. This is very energy light in terms of how it's used. No moving parts, and highly scalable and cleanable. And so what we've done many studies looking at that this type of technology and different types of fermentations and bioconversions. And here's one looking at Saccharomyces cerevisiae in a basic media, and we're seeing the difference here in terms of their growth curves. So this shows you the OD level is really the amount of cells that we see, and then time is on the bottom. So you can see that the hydrosome in the light blue takes off more quickly and then reaches a ultimately higher biomass than the control does. So we're seeing benefits already here with a relatively simple type of fermentation, anaerobic fermentation in this case, that's seeing these benefits just by continuously infusing these bubbles over time. And here's where we started to go with it. Was we saw these benefits, and we wanted to work with qualified and expert partners, and that's where we talked to the folks at University of Illinois IBRL and started working with them at this 400 liter scale, looking at E. coli growth. So if we just try to understand the biomass implications of using ultrafine bubbles, we use this piece of equipment here. This is their bioreactor, and hooked up our tech right next to it to infuse continuously and see how that could benefit the process. And so if we look at that, we see growth curves that look like this, and we see differences where the lag phase is decreased by about 25%, which means it happens faster. So as this fermentation, this bioconversion is taking off much more quickly, and we're also noticing cell content being much, much higher for the same amount of glucose that's being added here. So we're seeing great efficiencies, again, just by infusing these bubbles and really enhancing that mass transfer. Looking more closely into that fermentation, into that conversion, we notice, again, a doubling time that was twice as fast with the hydrosome treatment. So we're really doubling these cells and getting them what they need more effectively. So we saw twice as fast. And then we even saw a better conversion of that carbon source into biomass. This is really important if we're thinking about efficiency and cost. If we can really move all of that carbon into biomass versus other secondary metabolites that we don't want, that's very important, and we saw about a 3 times better utilization of that carbon, of that sugar, into biomass here with the hydrosome treatment, which is really great. So taking all that away, we're really talking about efficiency gains and increases in product at the end of the day, seeing how we can speed things up, how we can make more cells and make more product without having to add any chemicals or increase our cost of goods by any meaningful measure. And again, it's using what you already have, the current infrastructure, and without regulatory impact, because we're not adding any sort of chemical or any sort of crazy new process here. It's very straightforward and something that is understood quite well. So it has a lot of potential at this point. I will say we're continue to work more with the university partners, again, Illinois, as I mentioned, and really trying to dig in more of this mechanism of action, focusing on things like gas transfer. So how are things being modified? Again, this is really important. If we know that, say, oxygen is limiting in a fermentation, how can we explore that a bit further to understand how the technology plays a role there? So that's what we're really focused on. The fermentations that are running as we speak are looking to understand that and see how we can benefit them and which fermentations we really benefit the most. And so kind of the early indications, if we go to the next slide, Ryan, is really looking at, again, changes in gas movement. So the ability to dissolve gases more effectively, like oxygen, and have those gases brought up. So that's the oxygen uptake rate. And then all this obviously bleeds into cost savings. So if we can really more effectively feed these fermentations with gas, then we can get more cost savings, because those cells are happier, they're growing faster, and ideally they're making more target molecule at the end of the day. So just a lot of really fascinating things here. It is still a really new area and lots of things still to be discovered, but our response in this space has been pretty tremendous. We have some really great collaborators and people that we're working with from folks in the ingredient space that are doing like this fermentation on the industrial scale, looking at converting all kinds of things into more value-added products. Soft drink companies that see the benefit of ultrafine bubbles in drinks and how that changes flavor and sugar reduction potentially. Brewers that obviously do a lot of brewing and use yeast a lot and want to be able to have more efficient fermentations, repitch yeast more often. Flavor houses that again are converting different intermediate compounds into flavor active molecules, and then academic collaborators as well are very interested in this. So lots happening. This is a big year for us in 2025, really pushing this technology sort of to its limits and focusing on getting the science out, publishing, and kind of moving this forward. So I know it's a lot to digest in probably 15 minutes, but definitely appreciate everybody's time and attention here today, and happy to field any questions you guys might have.
Nick, I didn't think it was possible to go through that many slides that quickly.
Ryan was keeping a good
Congratulations.
pace, so that was
He
helpful.
was
Thanks,
keeping
Ryan.
a good pace, and it was a little like the FedEx commercials of old, back when the guy talked really. So you crushed it. Having left us some time, what I'd like to do for all those that have posted questions into the Q&A, I'm going to call on several of you, and you can ask your questions directly. Elena will have enabled you to unmute yourself. And I'd like to start with the head of our Sustainable Food and Feed Technology Center of Excellence, Maya. Maya, can you unmute and ask Nick your question? Maya, are you there? All right, I'll read Maya's question and then we'll go to the next person. For those that have posted questions, be prepared to unmute yourself. Maya says, thank you for the great presentation, Nick. What are the capital and operational cost trade-offs in your ultrafine bubble systems and traditional sparging or micro bubble aeration and fermentation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maya. So we get this question from time to time. And so if we're thinking about improving the growth of microorganisms, one thing that will happen there too, if they're growing faster, is they're typically having more of them, and they're going to kick off a lot more heat. And so that's one question we get too. Is great if you're able to increase the amount of gas that they get, and they're happier there too. Your costs in terms of cooling might be increased, which can be significant too. So we're running some techno-economic models right now to look at that more specifically, of how, if we dial up the growth rates, how does that impact the heat emissions, and then how do we control that heat so that we don't have to add a lot of cooling costs on top of it as well too. So that's sort of the trade-off we're looking at right now. And again, it depends on the cell line, depends on what the process is, but that is a potential issue that we would have to look at depending on where that cutoff, that trade-off happens.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. Greg Potter, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, yeah. So I have a question here. I said, are there potentially different cell damage dynamics that occur due to popping of ultrafine bubble types relative to the larger bubble types you showed on your slide?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. So what we know about larger bubbles, let's call it those micro bubbles, that when they do burst, they can damage cells. So they do have a kind of a negative impact there. Since ultrafine bubbles are so stable, we don't see them kind of having that same impact, at least from what we've noticed in terms of viability and cell growth. So we haven't seen rupturing or lysis or decreased viability over time with them. So it seems like they're kind of in a different class because they are so small and because their properties are so unique that their stability kind of prevents them from causing larger damage. Again, it's still something we're looking into, but so far the damage on that side has been very minimal, if not minor.
Excellent. Thank you. You've generated a lot of questions, Nick, which is always
That's
a
great.
good sign. And we have several with multiple questions. We're going to start with Greg Benz. Greg, can you either pick one or combine your questions for Nick? Greg, can you unmute? All right. Well, in the interest of time, I will pick one for him.
Sure.
So he says, what happens to the nitrogen in the hydrosomes? Does the concentration of bubbles just keep increasing, adding to tank holdup? Question mark.
It's a great question. So
I
we get
think
this a
I'm
lot too.
unmuted now.
If we think about bubbles in the tank, and conceptually you would think, okay, if we're adding more and more of these, if they're not going away, if they're not rising and leaving solution, what happens to the overall volume? And again, because the scales that we're talking about here are still so tiny, and the concentration that we do generate is big. But again, when you look at the volume that those bubbles occupy, we aren't seeing a meaningful change in volume based on that. There's lots of tiny bubbles in here, but we're not seeing, a difference in that density of that liquid in any meaningful way, or the volume. So overall, the working volume remains the same, and we haven't noticed any. Again, the physics here are still so small that we're not moving the needle in terms of that overall liquid volume.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
You are, Greg. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. The answer most of it, but I guess what I'm thinking is that if you're putting oxygen in and it's in a mixture with air, there's nitrogen which doesn't get consumed. So it would seem like you'd have to replenish the oxygen and the nitrogen would build up unless you're using pure oxygen as your source for the microbubbles.
Right. So yeah, mostly in these cases, that's a great point, Greg. We are using air in there too. So whatever is dissolved mostly, and again, oxygen is more soluble in the liquid than nitrogen. So those bubbles likely have a higher composition of that oxygen. Again, we're not encapsulating every single moiety of that dissolved gas in there too. So we're just taking a fraction of that, and then the rest of it is still being able to be dissolved in the liquid too. So we're just taking a small amount of that gas that's in there and converting that into ultrafine bubbles. But if we do this over time enough, that concentration becomes meaningful, and we do see positive changes as it pertains to the growth of those cells.
All right. Thanks. Greg, if you can go on mute, we can switch over to Dr. Terry Maznak. Terry?
Hey, nice talk by a fellow Cornell alumnus. I have a question. Yeah, you too, JD. What other solvents can you do this with? Methanol, acetic acid, toluene? What's the limit?
That's a great question. So far, the solvent we've been using mostly has been just been water, so aqueous solutions. There's been some groups looking at combinations of water and different solvents, like say ethanol, to be able to increase the bubble concentration, maybe even stabilize them too. But so far, having some level of dissolved gas in that liquid stream is very important, and we haven't ventured out and looked at other types of solvents at this point, although some groups are looking at that.
Right. Thank you. Mike Stickland, you have bombarded us with questions. You want to grab a couple and ask Nick?
Hey, Nick. Yeah, great, interesting technology for sure. I'll bundle them together. I'm in the fuel ethanol space. So how would this improve the fuel ethanol fermentation process overall in terms of glucose to ethanol efficiency? And then a corollary question, do you think it would improve extraction of corn oil from the corn germ inside fermenters somehow? So those two questions.
That's a great question, Mike.
Yeah, there was one more. It was making
Sure.
other ethanol, higher ethanols like butanols, which because of toxicity to the yeast is always struggle with high titers. So
Interesting.
Yep, that's it.
It's fair. Let me work through those questions. So yeah, definitely on the glucose side too, we have done some work even in anaerobic fermentations with Saccharomyces and showed some better growth curves in terms of how those Saccharomyces respond even as they ferment due to the Crabtree effect. So we are seeing benefits there. We haven't at this point looked at that conversion of glucose to ethanol. We are mostly focused on biomass at that phase as initial startup, but we have had that question come up a few times. That's definitely something we want to look at. So I guess more to come on that side. When it comes to corn oil and extraction, again, this technology has been used quite heavily in the wastewater treatment space to flocculate different waste streams, including oils and organics. And so conceivably, there could be a benefit here using these ultrafine bubbles to really help maybe get in there and help to flocculate and move those oils out of those germs and get into those nooks and crannies, because they are so small, they can really get into smaller crevices. So I think that's feasible. I think that would be a really interesting experiment actually to look at that extraction. Then higher alcohols, I think it's sort of TBD as well. We have to see how they respond there too. If we did a deeper dive into the fermentation byproducts in the corn ethanol space, but yeah, that's we've had that question before too, and I think that's something we really like to dig into. But great questions, and maybe we should talk after this too, and maybe discuss further about how this technology could be worked on with what you're doing.
Sounds good.
Be careful what you wish for. Yeah, I'll put you guys together, Mike. I
Appreciate
promise. Next question, Doug Rivers. Are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Hey, very interesting technology. Just as hopefully a very simple question. What scale of operations have you functioned at, and do you see the same types of benefits at larger scales versus, say, lab or pilot scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. So the fermenter that you saw from the University of Illinois, it's at 500 liters. That's the largest we've done to date, and seen really good results there. We have a lab unit that we use as well too, which hooks up to fermenters that are typically around 20 liters or so, and so we typically actually see better results as we get larger. So as we scale up, we are working with some partners right now on fermenters that are 100 cubic meters, and we're designing our technology to be able to fit onto those too. So that's kind of our next phase of moving up. But so far, yeah, the scale up process has been good. Making it larger is actually easier. Making it smaller with some of the engineering and some of the nozzle technology is more difficult. So it benefits at this point at the pilot scale, which again for us is around about 1,000 liters to 10,000 liters, has been very good.
Nice, thank you.
No problem.
Ron Newman, you're asking a basic question which may go into NDA land. If so, Nick, feel free to let him know. But Ron, are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hi, Nick. Thank you for the presentation. Great presentation. Very simple question. How are the bubbles created?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so I can talk about this at a high level too, but we use principles of something called hydrodynamic cavitation, where we pull the liquid streams, so that could be water or it could be a media broth containing cells, into our device. We create low pressure areas where we're actually pulling out dissolved gases that are contained in that liquid, and then as the liquid exits our technology, those gases come back into solution in a rather violent form, and in doing so, they kind of break down into these macro bubbles and then ultrafine bubbles. So it's a process of taking those gases and redissolving them in a very controlled way. And then in doing so, those bubbles are created. So that's sort of our IP around the technology. There's different ways to make ultrafine bubbles in general. You'll see some folks use membrane technology. So they have very fine membranes where they're able to flow a liquid stream at high velocity over that membrane to make them. There's ultrasonic methods to make them as well too. There's different solvents you can add to liquids to make ultrafine bubbles. But we like our technology because, again, its ability to make them reproducibly. You can sanitize the equipment. It's not prone to fouling like a lot of other techniques are, and it's scalable. So that makes it really, commercially viable, where a lot of other techniques can make them at the lab scale, but nothing bigger than that. So it's more than you wanted, but that's, kind of what we're thinking.
Okay, thank you. I just have a quick follow-up question. Sure. Why can't you extend this technology to the chemical industry at large, where there's gas liquid reactions, hydrogenations, and so on? Is it cost prohibited?
I think it's a great question, but I think it's more of a focused question at this point. With the company where we're at right now and getting it established, we have a few key areas that are working quite well for us, and so we need to establish those first, just to kind of get the company on its feet and those revenue streams established before we start hunting after other ones. As I mentioned, we have even large beverage companies that want to do a lot of infusions of different types of gases. That's a very interesting part of our company that we're looking at right now. But right now, our main focus is really fermentation and a bit on the cosmetic side too. We're commercialized in that space using the bubbles to help improve deposition of different active ingredients into the skin, so increasing permeability using bubbles. So kind of one step at a time sort of thing, but the applications for this technology are seemingly endless. There's so much here that we can look at.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. Last question, Nick, believe it or not, comes from our newest managing director, David Peterson. David, can you unmute and ask your question?
Absolutely. Nick, fascinating presentation. Thank you for the time to bring it to us. Is this technology relatively transferable to all sorts of different types of gases?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, so that's a big area of focus for us as we get through commercializing fermentation. So for example, even the fermentation space, there's different types. There's gas fermentations, for example, right, that will use different carbon sources like CO2 or carbon monoxide or methane even. And so we've had interest of folks looking to dissolve those gases into ultrafine bubbles to increase their resonance time and their sort of solubility. But yeah, all kinds of gases have gathered lots of attention recently. A big one that gets there's been a lot of publications on is ozone. So if we're looking to increase the half-life of ozone from, say, 15, 20 minutes to some groups have published around 3 hours or so, increasing the life of that, that's a really cool technology in sanitation. But then, like I mentioned too, in beverage, people are saying, hey, what if you make a very small, ultrafine bubble with CO2? Interestingly, nitrous oxide, which is the laughing gas that we all know from the dentist, has really interesting properties in water where it tastes sweet when it's in water. And so there's a lot of beverage interest around, can we make that into an ultrafine bubble, increase its shelf life of that, and pack it, increase the impact of that gas on the sweetness receptors that we have in our mouth. So again, there too, there's so many possibilities around what different gases can do, and that's sort of the next phase of this whole industry, I really think, as it takes off. But yeah, that's a loaded question, Dave, but I think there's a lot there that could be incorporated.
You mentioned there's a focus issue. You need to focus on a few projects first, few applications, but you're probably aware of the bleaching industry, ozone, chlorine dioxide, oxygen, water treatment, oxygen, ozone, huge applications.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So I think, once we get these ones under our belt in terms of fermentation and getting that all squared away, I think it's it's a business decision on what we go after next too. So I think
hopefully your IP allows you to do that.
That's a big strategy point too, is making sure we have a good moat around all of this technology, because it is so new and there's so much white space out there. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you need a good IP picket fence.
We definitely do. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, David. That was awesome. And Nick, incredible. You made Cornell proud today. Like there wasn't a question that caught you off guard by any stretch. It was incredible. I know we're looking at working closely with you on a variety of other projects. I know Maya is one of your greatest cheerleaders for what you're able to accomplish. And it sounds like Mike Sticklin might become your best friend. So he's added like 4 more questions to the feed. So I'll just connect you guys directly.
That's fair.
But as we move into our internal sort of recognitions and announcements, you're welcome to stay. If you would like to sign off, I just wanted to thank you again for just a really, really great presentation. You obviously engaged our team. Our team has such a breadth of experience that hopefully we can continue to collaborate and see if we can't come up with some new ways to apply. And I would be remiss if I didn't sort of announce our Sustainable Food and Feed Technology Center of Excellence with Maya and Greg and Joel and Terry and lots of other folks, Mike as well. So if you are interested in this space, you have projects in this space, please reach out to us, and please reach out to Nick. You have his contact details. So anyway, Nick, thank you again.
Awesome.
It was fabulous.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Thanks. I have to take off here, but yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, all the best. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Cheers. Look
Appreciate
forward
it.
to
Thanks.
the next conversation.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Wow. The questions overfloweth. So now we get to move to one of my favorite parts of our monthly webinar series, and that's expert recognition. And we have the unveil. Melissa Mazzari, Dr. Melissa Mazzari, is a new expert with us. She is a fine PhD out of Iowa, has been doing a lot of work across a host of areas. She's currently doing consulting and is a recent addition to LEC, and we're thrilled to have her. Melissa, are you able to unmute and perhaps go on camera? There
I
you
hope
are.
that I am ready
Thank you.
unmuted.
You are perfect.
I'm here. Thank you so much for this opportunity and to join LEC Partners. It was an incredible presentation today, this morning, and I had a lot of questions actually to ask Nick, but I'll reach out to him. There are fortunately lots of applications that I could probably have used like 10 years ago in one of my researchers. So anyways, good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa, and I'm an environmental engineer from the University of Iowa. And I have been a scientist for over 20 years. And I love my experience in the nexus of environmental and human health. And my background in environmental engineering focused on leveraging the natural systems for remediation, which means phytoremediation, bioremediation, rhizo-remediation, and those are all published. You're welcome to see my publications online, and they were mostly focused on plant-based remediation technologies. Later on, I did some studies and research on the phycoremediation area using microalgae to treat wastewater treatments for wastewater treatment plants. And I used the concept of using CO2 or biogas produced in wastewater treatment processes. That's where the microbubbles would come in handy to produce more biofuel or biomass, microalgae biomass, and clean up the wastewater system with the tertiary system. And that aligns with my sustainability goals and innovative approaches in bioeconomy, where I could actually, in the projects, I could recirculate water in the system as well. I have expanded my research in the fascinating field of the human microbiome. I'm here in Houston, in the biggest medical center of the world, and I was dragged into it. And I always joked around over there in the biology and molecular biology department saying, we are walking bioreactors, aren't we? Because we have more bacteria in our bodies than our own cells. So I actually had the opportunity to work with a lot of researchers and physicians throughout the United States and abroad. And I worked with experts in Baylor College of Medicine, in MD Anderson Cancer Center, in Boston hospitals, and I was able to design and implement their research to understand better the human bodies as a whole. And looking forward, I'm currently working as a scientific writer and associate editor at Frontiers in Climate, and I work in the biotech and carbon capture technologies. And at this stage of my life, I hope to make a global impact. My goal is really to bring people with different disciplines together to brainstorm and develop strategies to help the world. And because I believe that different perspectives lead to accelerated innovation. So I believe that my expertise can actually help contribute to LEC Partners and to the vision and provide cutting-edge solutions to transform the bioeconomy.
Thank you so much. We're so happy you're here. Thank you for
Thank
reaching out on LinkedIn, by the way. It was great to connect and
Yes.
learn more about what you're doing. And, please feel free to reach out to any and all LECers to see if there aren't ways to collaborate. And
Okay.
now we get to move on to our announced all-star. No one's going to be surprised by this. Terry has been probably the longest serving managing director, I believe, here at LEC. He's been an incredible resource for me, and I know for many, many others. He is selfless in many ways, and even when he is spending time in Florida, he's happy to pick up and take first calls on clients, and he's been an incredible partner to me and to many others. So, Terry, how about coming on and taking a bow for being this month's All-Star?
Thank you, JD. That was kind of a long-winded way to say I'm old, which I don't mind. At least I'm here. And as I have a lot of people to thank here, if I go through the whole list, we'll be here another hour. But I do want to go right back to the beginning and thank Wayne Lee, who's not here. I don't think he's on today. But he really allowed me to get involved in this and get involved pretty heavily. And it's really brought me along for a long time. And I'm glad I've worked on more than, maybe 150, 160 projects. And with so many different scientists and engineers and others on this, it's been really a good ride. It's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of good clients, the occasional clunker who you have to get rid of somehow. But basically, it's been really a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And I'm imagining Ryan and JD picked me because they ran out of other decent people who deserve it. But thank you, everyone. And let's keep going. Let's raise the bar even higher.
Amen to that. Thank you, Terry. It's fabulous. The applause is coming through in the I love those little hands. In any event, we're looking forward to many, many more. And I know we have 2 or 3 active currently, so we will hope to nail a few of those down in the coming days. Now, one of our I think our final slide is our promotion for the second or third time. We have talked about it. When asked if he would be interested in moving from project director to managing director, his answer was instantaneous. We told him we wanted to try it on for size for a bit. And then all of a sudden, he starts taking the lead on a number of projects. Schooler in particular has shown and demonstrated what an amazing job he does with client relationships and expanding the scope of the project from 1 to 2 to 3 streams. He's been a great partner to me as well, and I'm thrilled to announce the formal and last time the promotion of David Peterson to managing director. So David, a quick hello.
Thank you, JD. That's so kind of you. I have to somewhat leapfrog onto Terry's comments. My thank yous actually go to a lot of people, and also just want to thank Terry for being such a great mentor to me, as well as Glenn and others. It's really an honor to be part of the team. Somewhat like Terry, I've been blessed to live long enough, so I've got over 40 years of unique experience, somewhat unusual and eclectic. It's been fun. It's a great way to apply all the things that I've learned, to work with a lot of great people, to continue to learn, and to help companies be successful. LEC has a wonderful group of top-notch experts, so it's great to work with everybody. And at heart, I'm an entrepreneur, so I just love working with multiple companies and helping companies be successful. So thanks for your trust in me, and look forward to, as Terry said, take the bar higher and push the frontiers. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, David. And you can see some nice words there from Jason as well. And for Terry, we had plenty of other choices. We chose you because you're always there. And David, we make the same choice for you, and we appreciate everything you do for us and for our clients. And you help, both of you guys have helped bring back clients on multiple engagements, which is the difference between where we've come from and where we're going, right? Long-standing relationships are the key to this business. So thank you, congratulations, and I think that brings us to closure, Ryan. Yes. And I would be remiss, and Ryan will yell at me if I don't point out that you can use your camera and go to these QR codes to sign up for our monthly newsletter, our LinkedIn newsletter, our LEC YouTube channel, where this webinar will be posted in the coming days. And hopefully they'll cut out all my nonsense. But for the most part, we are thrilled at having so many folks joining us. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your questions. Thank you again to Nick for a fabulous meeting. And have a great month, everybody.